Hello, welcome to Darasa Online. My name is Mr. Kileo Abubakar Davidson. I'm a geography teacher. Today we are going to learn or to discuss on water masses, and we will focus on what we call underground or groundwater as its subtopic. So let's see, because we are going to make a revision, so I'm going to make a simple introduction or simple summary of what we have learned at your school. So what is groundwater, by the way? Groundwater refers to the amount of water that has saturated the rock underground. We refer to the amount of water that are found below the earth's surface. Or sometimes we say underground water or groundwater refer to the amount of water found below the water table. Are we together? So what happened? It means, let's assume we have, this is a ground. See, it means right here we are talking, this is above the ground. Above the what? Above the ground. So if this is above the ground, it means we have the underground right here. We have rock found underground. So it means, for instance, during rainfall, it means there will be either the infiltration or the percolation of water underground. Then water will move down the crust, inside the crust. It will find different rocks right here. So some of the rocks will have can be made of what we call the empty space. Right now, water that will enter the ground or the underground will saturate, will occupy the space between the rock particles. Are we together? Then the amount of water that are within the space inside the rock particle are what we call the underground water. That's why we said underground water refers to the amount of water underground, refer to the amount of water below the earth's surface. As you can see, this is the earth's surface. Then the water that is found below the earth's surface, that's what we call the underground water. In a very simple way, you can say refer to the amount of water that has saturated the rock inside the earth. Are we together? Then from there, we said that is the definition of what we call the underground water. Then from there, we say water get into the ground. Water gets into the ground, passes two processes. See, when water gets into the ground, they normally pass two processes. We have what we call the infiltration, and we have what we call the percolation. These are two processes which water undergo or passes as it is flow down the earth inside the ground. So the first process we call the infiltration, and the second process we call it the percolation. So what is infiltration? Infiltration will refer to the downward movement of water underground but near the surface level. It means right now we are talking about the movement of water inside the rocks underground, but they found nearby the surface level. Are we together? It means, let's say it is our ground. It means there is the movement of water underground but near the surface level, as you can see. That is what we call the infiltration. But coming to percolation, percolation will refer to the further movement of water underground deep into the interior, either vertically or horizontally. Are we together? Let's assume there is a further movement of water underground deep into the interior, either vertically or horizontally. We say vertically or horizontally because sometimes water from the sea, they may percolate inland from the sea into the land, right? I mean, at this point right here. This is lateral movement of water far away from where they have been. I mean, from the starting point. It may be a sea, lake, or whatever. I mean, any source of water, water bodies. Or sometimes it may be vertical. You can see the vertical movement of water deep into the interior. So by making the difference between infiltration and percolation, we all know they are all processes where water used to enter the ground. But this one, the infiltration right now, it means that it is a movement of water underground, but not deep. It means water right now will be found nearby the surface level. While the percolation, it is the opposite of infiltration. It means right now we are talking about either the lateral or the vertical movement of water underground deep into the interior. Then from there, we said water gets into the ground passing two types of rock. when water gets into the ground, they pass two types of rocks. When water gets into the ground, see, into the ground, they passes two types of rocks. Listen to me very careful. When the water gets into the ground, you see, they passes two types of rock. We have what we call the porous rocks, as well as the pavers rocks. Porous rocks, these are the rocks made up of empty space, like the sandstones. Are we together? It means sometimes, I mean, in this process or in these rocks, it means water use the empty space between the sandstones to enter into the ground. See, and those type of rocks, we call them the porous rock. Example of porous rock is sandstones. This point, the example of porous rock is what? Is sandstone. Then from there we have the pavers rocks. It means these are the rocks made up of empty, crack or joints. So it means right now water will use the cracks or joint found in these rocks to enter into the ground. Then we say we have the porous rocks as well as the pavers rocks. Pavers rocks are the rocks made up of what? Of the joints or cracks. So it means in this type of rocks, it means water use either cracks or joint to enter the ground. Are we together? Then from there in porous rocks, it means these are the rocks made up of empty space. Empty spaces, we call them pores. Are we together? It means example of porous rocks are sandstone rocks. Then from there we have what we call, let's see, some terminologies that I'm sure we may find them when learning what we call the underground water. We have some terminology which are very important. The first terminology is what we call the water table. Water table refers to the upper limit of or upper level of water underground. Listen to me very careful. Water table refers to the upper limit or upper level of water underground. The upper limit or upper level of water underground. Okay? The upper limit or upper level of water underground, we call it the water table. Okay, let me draw this so I can understand. Let us take this as an example right here. You see, we know that when water enters the ground, it passes different type of rocks. Are we together? When water into the ground from the above into the ground, it passes different type of water of rock. So let's say there is a rainfall right here at the top of this land. Then it means right now we are talking about the movement of water underground. So water will move to the point where sometime it may found the hard rock, this one, which will prevent the further movement of water underground. It means this hard rock underground will prevent the further movement of water underground. This one, we call it the aquiclude. Aquiclude. So what is the aquiclude? We refer to the the hard rock which do not allow the further movement of water underground. Therefore, it means water right now will start accumulating at the rock above the aquiclude. Are we together? It means so right now we are showing this rock right here is where water will accumulate. We are talking about maybe sand or it got empty spaces as I've explained earlier. And these rocks which now will hold the amount of water underground, we call it is the aquifer. Aquifer. This one. The aquifer. It means aquifer refers to the soft rock, this one. The rocks made up of empty space where water right now will saturate or will be contained inside it. We call it the aquifer. Then, so let's say water have been contained in these rocks, the aquifer, and right now we found that this point here, the upper level of water underground, this is upper level of water underground, this is what we call the water table. Water table. That's why we say water table refer to the upper level or upper limit of water underground. water have been increasing from the bottom point or limit to this upper level right here. Are we together? So the upper level of water underground is what called the water table. The rock which get saturated and contain amount of water underground, we call it the aquifer. The aquiclude or the aquitad we refer to the hard rock which do not allow further movement of water underground. Are we together? So we said aquiclude sometimes can be called the aquitad. Aquitad. Are we together, student? Aquiclude sometimes can be called aquitad if aquiclude that we are talking about right now will be made up of clay rock after get wet and become dry. Once it becomes dry, it means it turned into a very hard rock. Are we together? So in that point, it means we are talking about this rock which will not allow further movement of water underground. Right now, we call it aquiclude, but we will call it the aquitad if will be made up of clay rock after get wet and become dry. So these are the very important terms when studying underground water. Then go back to aquifer. We have two types of aquifer. Listen to me very careful. We have the confined and the non or unconfined aquifer. The non-confined aquifer, we refer to the aquifer overlain by two impermeable rocks. Are we together? We call it the confined aquifer. But the non-confined aquifer refer to the aquifer which is overlain by one is impermeable, the hard rock, and the other is permeable, the soft rock. This aquifer we call it the unconfined or the non-confined aquifer. But if you find the aquifer overlain by hard rock as well, the hard rock at the top, it means at the bottom there is hard rock and at the top there is hard rock. It means it is between two hard rock. We call it the confined aquifer. Confined aquifer. So we have two types of aquifer. Types of aquifer. Type of aquifer. We have the confined aquifer and the non-confined aquifer, okay? Confined aquifer and the non-confined what? Aquifer. So, as I said, confined aquifer refers to the aquifer overlain by two impermeable or hard rocks. Then non-confined aquifer, it means at the top is overlain by what we call the permeable rocks or the soft rock, and at the bottom there is the hard rock. Then from there, we have what we call the zones of saturation. Zone of saturation, okay? Are we together? Zone of saturation, zones of the saturation. Zones refer to the layers. It means right now we are talking about different layer underground where water passes as it move or as it flow into the ground. Different layers where water passes as it move or as it goes underground, we refer them to as what? Zone of saturation. So we have three types of zone of saturation. We have the what you call the zone of non-saturation. See? Zone of what? Of non-saturation. Then we have zone of intermittent saturation. This is the second type of zone of saturation. Non-saturation, zone of intermittent saturation, and zones of permanent saturation. Permanent what? Permanent saturation. It means what happened to this zone of saturation. As I said, zone of saturation refers to the layers where water passes as it goes or as it flows underground. It means the first one, zone of non-saturation refers to the layers where water passes as it goes underground and then it becomes dry. It got wet when water passes into the ground. After that, it becomes dry. That's why we call it zone of non-saturation. Why? Because it does not get saturated. As I said earlier, the meaning of saturated, it means the rock, it gets wet and then it contains the amount of water. So right now, we are talking about the zone of non-saturation. It means it is the zone where water just passes as it flows underground. It gets wet and then it becomes dry. Then we go to the zone of intermittent saturation. It means it is the zone which gets wet during the wet season or during the rain season, and it becomes dry during the dry season. So it means right now in this zone is a zone where we will get the underground water only in wet season. It means in dry season we will not be able to get the underground water. Then we have the zone of permanent saturation. As I said, refer to the zone where it gets saturated in all periods or season of the year. Then at this point of zone of permanent saturation, it's where we get what we call the underground water, right here. Here at this point is what we call we get what we call the underground water. And in other way, it's the point where we can call it the aquifer. This point is the aquifer. Are we together, class? Then from there, we will see the sample question regarding today's topics, subtopics. And remember, it's a very important question because there are sample questions asked in a competent way. Let's see a simple diagram explaining some features of underground water. As I explained earlier, we have what we call the water table. As I've said, as you can see in this diagram, we have assumed this is our aquifer. Right now, it contains some amount of water. Then I said the upper level of water inside the ground or underground, this water, this level right here, we call it the water table. It means water have saturated the rock from the below. Right here, we have what we call the aquitard or the aquicloud, the hard rock which will not allow further movement of water underground. Then water will start saturate the rocks above it, and we call it the aquifer. So as it saturates, remember it saturates by going up. So the upper level of water inside the rock, this point here, we call it the water table. And remember, if you want to dig or to tap water underground by using well, it means you have to find what we call the water table. Or they always find what we call, what they call the water table. Because remember, they may dig this point here to tap water underground by constructing what we call the well. So in order to have the well, it means you have first to find what we call the water table. Then we have another diagram. I explained something known as aquifer. I told you aquifer refers to the layer or rocks underground which saturate water and contain the underground water. We call it the aquifer. So I explained two types of aquifer earlier, that we have the unconfined aquifer as well as the confined aquifer, as you can see right here. So confined aquifer, as I said, refer to the aquifer which is overlain by two hard rock. Are we together? Then unconfined aquifer refer to the aquifer overlain by the hard rock and the soft rock. As you can see right here, we have the soft rock, and this one is the aquifer. This is the hard rock. So the aquifer overlain by two rocks. One is soft rock and the other is hard rock. This type of aquifer, we call it non or unconfined aquifer. Then from there, let's see another diagram so that I can explain more some of these features. For instance, when you look carefully in this diagram, you'll see unconfined aquifer. As I've explained, we have the hard rock, this one. It is the hard rock. It means we have the aquifer right here and another aquifer right here. So this is hard rock and this is hard rock. So the aquifer overlain by two hard rock, we call it the confined aquifer. While at the top we have unconfined aquifer. Why? Because we have the hard rock and the soft rock right here. So the aquifer which is overlain by soft and hard rock, we call it the unconfined aquifer. Okay, so let's see some of the sample questions concerning our topic today. Concerning today's topic, which is water masses, and the subtopic is underground water. Okay, let's see the model question relating to ground or underground water. With the aid of diagrams, explains the processes involved in hydrological cycle and its link to underground water. So as a Form 6 student, because right now we are making revision, I know you know what is hydrological cycle, and right now I have give you the simple summary of what is underground water. So it's very important to describe the processes involved in hydrological cycle, and at the end we have to link the whole system of the hydrological cycle or water cycle with what? With an underground water. So let's see what is hydrological cycle. As you know, hydrological cycle refers to the continuous or the endless process where there is movement of water from the ground into the atmosphere, then from the atmosphere into the ground. So we call it the continuous process of water circulating It's an endless. Why? Because we know right now this is the land surface. Then we have the atmosphere right there. It means there is the movement of water from the ground, either from the tree, from the land, or from the water bodies. It means right now there is the movement of water from this point into the atmosphere, then from the atmosphere into the ground, etc., etc. So the question asked here to describe the process involved in hydrological cycle. So we have, processes. The question need to explain processes involved in water cycle or hydrological cycle. So the first process you can see there is evaporation. We have evaporation, we have transpiration, and the combining process which we call it is the evapotranspiration. Then we have the condensation, and the last we have what we call the precipitation. So let's say what is evaporation. Evaporation is the first process. Evaporation refers to the loss of water from the ground into the atmosphere. The loss of water from the ground into the atmosphere. Most of the time evaporation it occur in area where with water bodies. As you can see right here, there is evaporation. The loss of water from the ground into what? Into the atmosphere. We call it the evaporation. Transpiration refers to the loss of water from the vegetation. You see? The loss of water from the vegetation into the atmosphere, we call it what? The transpiration. It means this is the second what? The second process in hydrological cycle, transpiration. It means this loss of water from the land into the atmosphere. That is what we call the evaporation. While the transpiration, it means it is the loss of water from the vegetation into the atmosphere. Then from there we have the combining process in case maybe you have the land which is moist as well as the land is characterized by different type of vegetation. It means we will have the combining process of evaporation and transpiration. Then we call it the evapotranspiration. Evapotranspiration. It means it is the third process. Evapotranspiration refers to the combining process of evaporation and what? And transpiration. Then from there we have the condensation. Condensation. What is condensation? Remember, what is condensation? It means condensation refers to the process where the water vapor which has been lost from the ground into the atmosphere right now is changed into the water droplets or the liquid droplets. Condensation, it means right now the water vapor is now changed into water droplets. Water droplets, which right now hang at the atmosphere at this point. That's another process. So what happened? It means if there will be more cooling at the atmosphere, either due to advection or other processes, for instance, what we call the frontal, it means there will be the increase in weight of the what? Of the water droplets which hang at the atmosphere. So the increase in weight of the water droplets which hang or suspend at the atmosphere will cause the falling down of the water droplets. Why? Because the atmosphere will fail to hold the liquid drops. Why? Because there is increase in mass of the water droplets. Then the falling down of the water droplets from the atmosphere into the ground is what we call the precipitation. So precipitation can be in form of either ice or water droplets. Those are the 5 processes of hydrological or water cycle as the question needs. But at the end, the question needs us to explain or describe its link to underground water. So what happened is, I said earlier, that underground water refers to the amount of water underground. So the question is very simple, because right now it needs us to explain the link between the water cycle or the hydrological cycle and what we call the underground water. So listen to me very careful. What happened right now, it's like we are explaining one among the factors which affect the amount of groundwater is climate. And in climate, it means we are talking about the rainfall. we all know that area with little or no rainfall, it assume or it would determine the very little amount of water underground. Why? Because we expect most of the area with high rainfall, they expect to have high amount of water underground due to high rate of infiltration and percolation. So it means, how are you going to answer your question? You will explain the whole process of hydrological cycles, as well as the factors affecting the hydrological cycle, and later in your conclusion you link by explaining what is underground water, type of underground water, and how do rainfall especially link it to what? To the amount of groundwater as I explained earlier. So that's the way you are supposed to answer this question. Then from there, we have to see the the second question related to our subtopic today, which is groundwater. We have another question, or the second question, which said account for 6 factors which influence infiltration and percolation of underground water in the world. 6 factors which influence infiltration and the percolation of underground water in the world. So in general, it means it needs us to explain factors which influence the rate of infiltration and percolation of water underground. So as I explained earlier, it means how are you going to answer this question? In your introduction, you have to explain what is underground water. You have to explain what is underground water. Are we together? In your introduction, you have to explain what is underground water. And second, you explain that water get into the ground passing 2 processes, infiltration and percolation. So you have to tell them what is infiltration. Infiltration as well as what is percolation. Thereafter, you have to explain factors which influence the rate of infiltration and percolation. As a result, at the end, you get high amount of underground water within the rocks particles. Within the rocks underground. Okay, let's see 6 factors which affect or which influence the infiltration and percolation of underground water. So the first factor is factors influence the rate of infiltration and percolation of underground water. So factor influencing the rate of percolation and infiltration of underground water. Before explaining the factors, let me explain type of underground water. So through type, we understand we'll be able to explain the factor influence the rate of infiltration and percolation. We have type of ground or underground water. Type of ground or underground water. The first one is meteoric ground water. Then we have the cornet ground water. Then we have the juvenile, or sometimes they call magmatic groundwater. And the last one is oceanic groundwater. As you can see, we have 4 types of groundwater. We have the meteoric groundwater, the cornet groundwater, the juvenile or the magmatic groundwater, as well as the oceanic groundwater. So these are the origins of groundwater. It means meteoric groundwater are referred to the amount of underground water which is derived or originated from rainfall. It means the meteoric, it is derived or originated from what? From rainfall. So it depends on the amount of rainfall of a given area. It means if the area is comprised of high rainfall in terms of its climatic condition, it means we expect high amount of groundwater. Then cornet groundwater, we say, refer to the small amount of water underground retained in the sedimentary rocks during the time of its formation. Remember, when there is formation of sedimentary rocks, there was a deposition of different material which later lithified together, compacted underground for many, many years under great heat and pressure. They may turn into rock. So one among the products that will be formed there is what we call the underground water. That's why we say the small amount of water underground retained during the formation of sedimentary rocks. The amount of water which retained underground during the formation of sedimentary rocks, we call it the connate underground or connate groundwater. Then we have the juvenile or the magmatic groundwater. It means it refers to the amount of water underground formed or occurred during the igneous or the volcanic activity. So what happened to this point is most of the juvenile or magmatic groundwater, they are usually mineralized and hot. They are usually mineralized and hot. So they may be formed to events or phenomena what we call it geysers or hot spring. If the hydrostatic pressure inside it or inside the underground water will be of high force. Then from there we have the oceanic groundwater. The oceanic groundwater, it means we refer to the amount of groundwater originated from the sea or oceans. Most of this groundwater are saltier water. Then from there, let's see the factor which influences the rate of infiltration and percolation of underground water. So the factor is the question need, because the question right now, it needs us to explain the factor which influence the rate of infiltration and percolation. So the first factor is the nature. It depends on the nature of the surface rock. Nature of the surface rock. You see, remember right now, for instance, if there is rainfall, you see, if there is rainfall, then we expect this is the ground. Then if at the top right here, the nature of the rock is very hard, the resistance rock. If this point here will be made up of resistance rock, then we expect there will be very little infiltration or percolation of water underground. So at the end, we expect or we will get the small amount of water underground. Why? Because there is a very little infiltration in percolation of water underground due to the presence of a very hard rock at the surface of the land. Its opposite is that when the surface, at this point at the top of the land is made up of soft rock, then we expect a high rate of infiltration and percolation, where later will result to the high amount of water underground. It is the first point. Then we go to the second point. The second point can be gradient or slope. So they said it depends if the area is like this. See, this is steep slope. This is gentle slope. This is gentle slope. So remember, at the steep slope, there is fast flowing of water down a slope. It means at this point, there is a little infiltration and percolation rate. While at the gentle slope, there is slow movement of water down a slope. It means if there is a slow movement of water down a slope, then at this point, we expect high rate of infiltration and percolation. Then most of the area found in gentle slope, we expect high amount of water underground compared to the area of what? Of steep slope. We call it, that's another, that it is what we call or refer to it as slope or the gradient. Then from there, we have another factor known as climate. Climate. So let us talk in terms of temperature and rainfall. You see, area of high temperature in terms of hot, it means there will be little amount of water underground. Why? Because there will be high rate of evaporation or transpiration. Then most of water which are underground will be taken into the atmosphere. But we expect area of low or little temperature. It means area of cold or cool areas. Here we're talking about the hot areas. Here we are talking about the cool areas. Most of the cool areas we expect to be to have high amount of water underground. Why? Because at this point there will be little evaporation and transpiration rate. Then you go to the rainfall. It's easy. We know that area of high rainfall. Then we expect at this point there will be what we call high amount of water underground, while area with little or no rainfall, here there will be small amount of water underground. You see, this is rainfall. Then from there we have what we call the vegetation. Vegetations. It means, let's take an example, is forest. So vegetation, it has the direct and indirect effect on underground water. Let's see the direct effect first. The direct effect. It means we know vegetation, it influences rainfall. It influences rainfall. See, areas of dense forest, there is normally high rainfall due to what? Due to high rate of evaporation and transpiration. Then at this point, if there will be high amount of rainfall, then we expect high rate of infiltration and percolation. Later we will get what we call high amount of underground water. Apart from influencing rainfall, remember in area of forest, there is shadow. There is presence of shadow. So the presence of shadow in forest areas, it means it prevents evaporation, the rate of evapotranspiration. See, so if there will be less rate of evapotranspiration, it means at this point there will be high amount of water into underground. Then you come to indirect effect. Indirect effect. Indirect effect, it means sometimes vegetation may reduce the amount of water underground. How? We know vegetations are living things. Say they use the water which are inside the ground. So they decrease amount of water underground. Why? Because vegetation, as I said, are living things. So they use water for photosynthesis process. This is indirect effect. But also vegetation, they may increase amount of water underground. Why? Because remember, the place where increased water underground by providing a place where water may enter or soak into the ground, especially at the stem. You see, at the point where there is a stem in the ground right here, see, at this point there is place of weakness. So if there was a flowing of water, it means water may enter the ground through this point here. Are we together? Then we say we have the direct and the indirect effect which influences the rate of groundwater through vegetation. Then from there we have the type. It depends on the type of soil. It depends on the type of soil. Type of soil. So right now we are talking about what we call it depends on the amount of empty space within the soil bodies. Some of the soils, they are made up of more spaces or pores. See, we are talking about the empty space between the soil particle, empty spaces between the soil particles. So if the soil is made up of more empty spaces, it means there will be high rate of what? Of infiltration and percolation of water underground. Then we expect high amount of water underground at the end. But if the soil will be made of very few space, it means no pores at all. It means we expect no, or there will be very little amount, rate of what? Infiltration and percolation. Where at the end we will get low amount of water underground. The last point is what we call water bodies, presence of water bodies. The presence of water bodies. Water bodies. It means right here the amount of infiltration or percolation, remember, it influences the rate of, or the amount of water underground or into the ground. So the point is, most of the area which are located nearby water bodies, we expect high rate of infiltration percolation, which will lead to the high rate of water or amount of water underground. But areas which are located far away from water bodies, then we expect little rate of infiltration percolation, which will lead to small or low rate of water underground. So these are the factors which influence the rate of what? Infiltration percolation, which at the end will affect the amount of water underground in general, as I've explained earlier. So by concluding or giving you a quiz, I'm going to left you with a quiz that you'll do it because I know right now you are listening and you are at home. You can take it as a quiz. Explain factors affecting the types of fresh water. Fresh water. This is the first question. The second question is explain condition necessary for the formation of an artesian well. Please go and read this, and I need the answers, please. Listen to me very careful. These are very important questions, especially in water masses, see, relating to underground water. Explain factors affecting the type of fresh water. Fresh water is another name for underground water. So go and explain factors affecting what? Types of underground water. Thereafter, I need you to explain conditions necessary for the formation of what we call the artesian well. Then thank you very much. Until the next time, thank you. You are most welcome.